I'd like to thank first the folks at TEDx for a worthwhile opportunity here today, and any excuse to come home. I do miss Washington, D.C. a lot, so it's wonderful to look out and see the Capitol and see home again. And I'd like to thank the museum. As a professional in broadcasting and in journalism, it is an honor and a pleasure just to be in this building. It's a wonderful museum, and it's long overdue that our profession has something like this, so it's wonderful. I want to tell you a little bit about ESPN and where it was and where it is and where it's going. And if the topic is reinvention of sports media, the premise really I'm going to start with you with is it's already been reinvented to the point where I believe on some level we own sports. Sports is us now. We determine when sports are played, how their championships are decided, who their affiliations are with now, and how successful they are all going to be. We have tours that come through ESPN every single day to see our studios when people get lost in Bristol, I suppose. And they come through, and every day, it doesn't matter who the tour guide is, they say the exact same line to all of them. When ESPN was born in 1979, everyone laughed and giggled and said, who in the world is going to watch sports 24 hours a day? And then everyone gives the gratuitous ha 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 ha, because we have ESPN and ESPN2 and ESPNEWS and ESPN Classic and ESPNU, and the NHL has a network, and tennis has a network, and the Golf Channel has a network, and there are multiple speed channels now in the NFL and Major League Baseball, and there's Comcast Sportsnet and MASN, and now college conferences have their own channels, and teams have their own channels. So who's watching it 24 hours a day? Apparently everybody, and they all have multiple televisions because they're watching all of these things 24 hours a day. And I always thought at some point this has to get spread too thin, that it's saturation, that people can't be that interested in one particular topic. But the reality is we have an insatiable hunger for it. And no better example could be the Northwestern University. Did any of you go to Northwestern University? You did? You did? All right. Good. You are probably a very intelligent person, right? But you probably had no hope to be an athlete on any level. At least that has been the history of your school. You are more apt to produce someone like myself, a journalist, than you are to produce Lebron James. That may never happen at your school. That said, Northwestern University last year made over $20 million in television rights fees. Nobody cares who Northwestern plays. Nobody watches who Northwestern plays. And most of you in this room probably couldn't name one person that's ever put on their uniform on any level. Northwestern University has never reached the NCAA tournament. Northwestern University has never played in one of the major bowl games notarized by the BCS, and yet they made $20 million in rights fees last year because of television, because their conference started its own network. And just like ESPN 30 years ago, when everyone laughed and said, who in the world is going to watch sports 24 hours a day? Everyone laughed at this Big Ten conference and said to them, your best games are already owned by somebody else. What in the world could you possibly show that anybody would want to see? And the truth was, something, because they made $20 million a year, and this was the one school in the conference whose games nobody cared about. And so all these other conferences looked around and they said, those guys are onto something. We're going to build our own conferences and our own networks now. And the Pac-10 looked at this and they said, we're already in these major media markets. We have schools in Los Angeles, and San Francisco, and Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon, and Phoenix, Arizona. And they said, we're going to do this, but we're going to do it better than them. We're going to go get schools in other regions of the country and build a national network. And so they went to Texas. Texas, who plays Oklahoma, and Nebraska and Colorado have been doing it for 100 years, have regional rivalries. People watch them play these games. The people in the Pac-10 decided Texas would be great to join our conference because we could put our network in all of these major networks. And then the Big Ten saw this and said, well, we got to go get Rutgers. I mean, all their schools are in the Midwest, Northwestern and Michigan and Ohio State and all these schools that are occurring in these areas. And they said, we got to go get Rutgers. Rutgers, like Northwestern, produced very little athletically in terms of competitive level. But they looked, Ray Rice, but they said we could be in the New York market with the Big Ten network, and that would increase our television rights. And so television nearly changed the face of college football this year. Texas almost went to the Pac-10. Schools like Kansas who won a national championship in basketball, played in a major bowl 2 years prior, they almost had no conference affiliation because the television networks don't care about the market they're in. So here's this school that's competing on the highest level in the major sports that make money, and nobody wants them. And here's these other schools that just because they happen to be regionally in an area that would bring more eyeballs to their games, they're wanted. And so it changed ultimately what we've gotten used to in college football. Now, the reason why it didn't change dramatically was Texas decided not to leave. But the only reason why they decided not to leave was because their conference had to make a deal with them. And their conference told them, whatever television rights we get, we're not going to split equally. You're going to get more. And then Texas said, well, we're going to start our own TV network. Not a conference network, our own network. All of their major games are on all these different areas, and yet they believe they could make money with their own network. And the conference told them, even if you play us in it, you can keep all of those revenues. So they are the Yankees of the Southwest now. They are going to make so much more money than any other school that they're playing with. We'll see what kind of competitive disadvantage they will have in the long term. I want to talk about some numbers. It's not just television dollars and all this stuff that's increased. Everybody who's involved in this can thank television for where they are today in this industry. In 1979, ESPN was born, and in 1979, the average salary for a baseball player was about $113,000. Let's say the Yankees were the Yankees then, as they are now, and they always had a more expensive team, and they paid their team 3 times the average player. Their player made 3 times. Their entire salary in 1979 for their team would be under $10 million. Last year, their payroll was over $200 million. Now, you may say, that was 30 years ago. It's a long time. A lot of things have changed. A lot of people make more money. A lot of things are different now. So I'll move it ahead, and I'll pick a different sport. In the NBA, in 1985, the game had been reinvented. Larry Bird and Magic Johnson changed the level of interest in this game to a dramatic level. People felt differently about it. And the average salary at that point in time for those players in the mid-'80s was about $303,000. Last year, $3.4 million was the average salary of a coach in the NBA. Not LeBron James, not Kobe Bryant, not all the people who make the plays, the coach, most of which, if I name them, you would never have heard of them before. They made $3.4 million. And you may say that's the mid-'80s and it's a long time ago, and it's been a long time. All right, I'll take you to the mid-'90s. In the NFL, in 1994, the NFL instituted their first ever salary cap. It was collectively bargained between the owners and their players. And at that point in time, the salary cap, the most you could spend for your entire payroll for your team, was $34 million. Last year, the last uncapped year under the current collective bargaining agreement, it was $128 million. It went from 34 to 128 million in 15 years. There's only one thing that could link all of these increases for player salaries and all the money that all these schools are making, and that's television. It's the only thing that's changed. And therefore, television dictates how sports are going to be played. And in fact, the most popular sport in this country, the NFL, may not play its games next year because of television. Because 3 years ago, when the television networks decided to have their new contracts with the NFL owners, they put a stipulation in there that was bargained in the contract that next year, the NFL owners will be paid their rights fees, hundreds of millions of dollars, no matter whether games are played. The NFL owners knew that the possibility of a lockout would occur this year because their collective bargaining agreement with their players union was ending after this year. So next year, the NFL owners stand to pocket hundreds of millions of dollars at the players' expense. It puts them in such a horrific bargaining position that they went to a special master and asked this judge to determine not to void out this contract, but to say that they've put us in such a bad position, we can't possibly have a fair labor negotiation with them here. They can lock us out and get hundreds of millions of dollars anyway. So what do they need us for this next year until they can get us into the position they want? And they've asked this special master to force them to put all of this money, not to void the contract, that'd be bad for business for everybody, but to put this money in escrow so that they can't use it until they get their players back on the field and they've come to some kind of labor agreement. And the NFL countered by telling them, and this is true, what was happening 3 years ago. 3 years ago, this country was bailing out Detroit. Car makers were failing. Financial institutions were failing. All our 401ks were blowing up. There was nothing left. And yet, at that point in time, they negotiated that television contract. Any of you that watch sports, when a commercial break comes on, what commercials do you see? You can't go 5 minutes without seeing an ad for a car. You can't go 5 minutes without seeing an ad for a financial institution. So while these industries were failing, the TV networks were so confident the money would be there anyway that they negotiated that you could have it even if we don't have product to place advertising in. And of course there's a make good on the back end of that deal that if there are really no games, they're going to owe money back to the NFL and they're going to have to play some games free of charge. But the point is that they were able to negotiate something in the midst of the worst economic crisis of our generation involving industries that typically are the forefront of the advertising dollars for them. TV owns professional sports. And if you're on the wrong side of TV, you're going to have a hard time staying competitive. Ask the NHL without their major TV markets. There's one other thing I want to talk about with you today, and that is what has been the major story in sports over the last couple of weeks, and that was LeBron James. And LeBron James decided to go to the Miami Heat. He says he took less money because he wants to play with his friends. He has a better chance to competitively win. The city of Cleveland apparently does still exist. That's good news. The city of New York can't believe that somebody would roll out the red carpet for somebody and he would turn them down. And that's the other thing that has changed, and that's the other thing that's been reinvented. Back in the 20, 30 years ago, you had to play for a major market to become a marketable athlete. That has completely changed now. With all of this saturation, we all know who LeBron James is, even if he does play for little Cleveland. And New York was constantly selling, he'll make more money if he comes here. And on a cursory level and in a local marketing perspective, he would. It's a bigger market, and he would be able to do so. But I would contend with you, he can be no more famous in Cleveland or Miami than he can be in New York these days, thanks to television and thanks to the exposure to all of these things. And the prime example of this are two brothers who play the same position in the same sport, the most popular sport in our country, the NFL, Peyton Manning and Eli Manning. And it's not even arguable that Peyton Manning has had a better career than Eli Manning. Peyton Manning is probably going to be a Hall of Fame football player. But the bottom line is, he's won one championship, and his brother has won one championship. And if the argument is that it's bigger to win in New York, and his brother won a game that has gone down as one of the greatest upsets of all time. Peyton Manning won a game, a Super Bowl against the Chicago Bears. His team was favored. Eli Manning beat a team that was 18-0, had Tom Brady as their quarterback, and was going for history. No team had ever gone 19-0, and Eli Manning made two plays that will be on every highlight reel for the end of history in terms of plays that he made in the fourth quarter of this game. And I ask you, in the immediate aftermath of that, and in the long-term aftermath of that, 3 years later, who's the more marketable person? Peyton Manning in little tiny Indianapolis, or Eli Manning in big New York? Peyton Manning is by far the more marketable person. So if New York was attempting to sell LeBron James that you will be bigger here, it's flatly not true anymore. It just isn't. I'm out of time. I know what that means. Where's this all going? I guess I got to wrap this up very quickly. Mobile technology is changing dramatically. All the access to this stuff, games on your phones, highlights on your phones, that's all changing dramatically. There's going to be a lot more niche channels now. So call your cable provider because your team is probably on some channel you've never heard of that is going to exist in the very near future. This college network thing is going to explode. There's going to be many of them. More teams like the Yankees who had the Yes Network, they're going to be able to put up their own type of networks. And what's turned out here is we're not watching sports 24 hours a day anymore. We're multitasking sports 24 hours a day. And our appetite for it apparently is insatiable. And I want to thank you all very much for your time today.
Terrific.